working on your, being your own therapist. This is the wisdom wing. So the consequence of this is you'd become this marvelous person in charge of who you are, in charge of your body, speech, and mind. You'd be not up and down like a yo-yo. You'd be more stable, more content. This is just short-term benefit. Because the essential point in Buddhism, the fundamental point in Buddhism, what goes on here is the main source of our happiness and suffering. Big surprise to us, because we are very convinced that what goes on out there is the main source of our happiness and suffering. We spend our lives, don't we, trying to manipulate the world out there to get it to be just so that we can get happy and stop suffering. Buddha's not arguing. Nothing wrong with changing the outside world. He just says it's not enough. So his emphasis is the mind. This is the key thing that distinguishes Buddha's teachings and his practices. His expertise is the mind. You would say that with certainty. And that we can change the mind, that we're not set in stone. So of course it takes enormous effort, because all our energy goes out there. So it's like reversing the energy of a bomb, to want to learn to pay attention here, and then learn the skills to mold this mind of ours. Like I said yesterday, and it's really true. We know in our world, we're geniuses at it. We're brilliant. We can mold our mind into any shape we like. We can mold our mind to the shape of a carpenter, a psychologist, a musician. We know this, but we don't understand that we can mold our mind into a happy person. That is a big surprise to us. Quite shocking, actually, but that's Buddha's expertise. So the wisdom wing is putting yourself together. Now you put yourself together, you're breaking down the barriers between self and other. If we're overwhelmed by depression and anxiety and anger, we know that we're overwhelmed by our own selves. We can't see past our own noses. And we see everyone in terms of whether they benefit us or not. We discussed this last night and when we talked about equanimity. So here, learning to mold our mind into a reasonably content, wise, fulfilled person, we inevitably break down the barriers that divide us between self and others. And now we start to see others and we realize everyone's in the same boat. Everyone wants to be happy. No one wants to suffer. And the tragedy is we might want to be happy, not want to suffer. We've got the wrong causes. We kind of make a mess. Everybody else is looking out there for suffering, to free from suffering and have happiness as well. So now we can become useful to others on the basis of having become useful to ourselves. That's the compassion wing. So compassion is a difficult one for us because, let's look at that, because this Buddhist view of it is quite radical. When we think compassion now, we usually think of the victims, and this is not being mean, it's just using a word, the little dog that gets kicked, the child that gets abused, the person who is harmed, the people in a country who are being abused by another country. They're the ones we have compassion for. But that's it. That's it. Like we talked last night, the very first step in this developing of this compassion that eventually encompasses everybody, the starting point is this equanimity, this recognition, this heartfelt recognition that all the beloveds, all the objects of our attachment, all the objects of our aversion, the ones we don't like, and all the objects of our indifference, the vast majority of all sentient beings, all the strangers, that from their point of view, actually they're the same as each other from this one point of view. They want to be happy and don't want to suffer. So then what do we do with that? And where do we go with that? Well, that's the point. We've got to first establish that. And then and what we're doing essentially, as we discussed last night, is shifting the illogic of ego to this wise logic, the basis now for my wanting someone to be happy. And that's the definition of love. May you be happy. And then developing compassion, which is defined as a thought, may you not suffer. So what compels me now, if I've got equanimity, is the recognition that they're equally wanted and equally don't want suffering. Then that becomes the basis of my wanting them to be happy and not wanting to suffer. Rather than now, the only group I don't want to suffer are my beloveds, and the only ones I want to be happy are my beloveds. I mean, we think about the others sometimes, but the ones we're focused on are our close ones, naturally. That comes naturally to us. So here we're trying to expand our mind to encompass everybody, and that's pretty intense. So to have compassion for the little child and the animal, that's easy. That's relatively easy. But to think that you should have compassion for the person who does the harming, that's too shocking. We can't find any basis for that. And that's why we have to look at karma. The basis in Buddhism for having a compassion for everybody is the understanding of karma, which you get in the wisdom wing. And this is fundamental. This is fundamental, to Buddha's entire worldview. This idea that there are trillions of consciousnesses, not just humans, animals, and many others we can't see. Their minds are not physical. Consciousness and mind are used synonymously. All these beings, their consciousness is not, this is a crucial point, the difference between the Buddha and other so-called religious philosophies. You know, so that if I'm a Christian, as I was a Catholic, then I'm the product of a creator. The creator put the soul into my mother's egg and sperm, essentially, at the time of conception. I heard the Jews say that God puts the soul in a few months later. So for Jews, it's okay to have an abortion because it's not a person yet, which is interesting. The Christians, they say it's from the second of conception. The soul goes in, so now you're a human being. You know, if you're a materialist, you are only the egg and sperm. So your mummy and daddy create you. If you're a Christian or a Jew, God creates you. So what's Buddha's view? Well, he's got this third. They're the two views we tend to have. You know. Well, the Buddhist view is mummy and daddy. Yep, they give us a body, no problem, but they don't give us a mind. And this is the starting point, which initially is quite shocking if we're a materialist philosophical view. As far as we're concerned, the brain is equivalent to the mind, not for the Buddha. So, of course, this is Buddha's view. You don't have to believe him, but take it as your hypothesis. And it's the fundamental basis of all the Buddhist teachings. All the Buddhist teachings make no sense if we really look at the big picture, unless we take in the view of karma. We might not see that initially, but if we study carefully, we can see that. So the Buddha's view is your consciousness is not physical, and it enters into the egg and sperm at the time of conception. And that's what causes you to become you. Otherwise, the egg and sperm go down the toilet with the rest, you know. So your consciousness coming into it, not from a creator, not from a mummy and daddy, but from a continuity of your own mind. So think of your mind as like a river of mental moments that goes back and back and back, and when you die will continue. This river of mental moments, think of it simply like that. They use the term mental continuum. So what runs that mind, the law that runs that mind, and there are trillions of these minds, all sentient beings, the law that runs that mind, which means the law that determines what goes on in that mind, is this law of karma, that such that anything we think and then do and say sows seeds in the mind every millisecond. Whatever we think and do and say, without exception, it's just a natural law. Programs that mind, sow seeds in that mind that then produce those seeds, unless you pull them out, will ripen in the future as the person we become. Another way to put it is they ripen as our happiness and our suffering. So this concept of happiness and suffering is kind of fundamental to the Buddhist way of seeing the world, you know. Buddha's observation is that every being wants happiness and no being wants suffering. And all Buddha's telling you is I've found some methods, how to get happy and how to stop suffering. That's one way of saying what Buddhism is, you know. So, but he is saying we are our own creators. As Dalai Lama says, karma is like self-creation, which is a shocking concept. It's a shocking concept. We haven't heard that before. There's either God or your mummy or daddy, and there's always someone else. And it's sort of interesting, the more you take on board the Buddha's views, you know, that's what I'm trying to live according to, using these as my hypothesis, the more absurd the idea is that someone else can give you a mind, that someone else can give you anger, love, compassion, being good at football or music. It's a bizarre idea for the Buddha, that whatever is in a mind comes from that person's own mind from the past. We're programmed, you know, with our own tendencies, our own experiences. So it takes a while to hear this because it's quite shocking. The usual way we hear it in the West is just another version of punishment and reward. You must have been, you know, you're naughty, so you're going to become a cockroach or something. We laugh at it, you know. And if you're good, you become, I don't know what. We only tend to worry about the bad stuff. I've never yet heard a person say, Robina, I wonder why good things happen. We only wonder why bad things happen. But the whole concept of punishment and reward is really powerful because that's what we think already. Even if you're not Christian or Muslim or Jewish and don't posit a creator, we all tend to think in terms of punishment and reward. You know, somehow it's a dualistic view the Buddha says is a function of ego. There's no view like that in Buddhism because there's no punisher and there's no rewarder. Buddha says it's a natural law. So in the same, I always use the analogy of ordinary things, like it's a natural law that if you smoke cigarettes, your doctor will tell you, if you smoke cigarettes, you'll get cancer. It's a possibility. And they'll show you the videos of all the cancerous lungs. And you don't say, how dare you say you're going to punish me? No, you know your doctor's not punishing you. She's simply pointing out what she has seen to be true. Buddha's like that. But we hear it as punishment. We hear it as reward. It's very deep in our bones. And that's a major point to think about. So when we start to take the view of karma, if we decide to use this as our view, what it brings is a sense of accountability. It stops the victim mind. It stops the anger, stops the attachment, because you realize you produce yourself. You realize you're in charge. It's a very powerful concept, actually, but it takes a lot of work, because instinctively ego has the exact opposite view. I'm this innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. Life is just good luck, bad luck. You know, that's how we think. Not for the Buddha. So the fundamental view of karma is a recognition, and this is taught in the Buddha's first teaching called the Four Noble Truths, Four Truths for the Noble Ones. That there is suffering, there are causes, you can get rid of suffering and its causes, and how to do it. So it's his presentation of what he has found to be true. So you first learn that for yourself, and you start to apply it. This is the wisdom wing. And then now, because you realize your suffering is a result of your past actions and your happiness is a result of your past actions, you know this, you're becoming more confident with this, then you see everybody else and your heart breaks. Because what we see is the main suffering is that everybody doesn't believe, everybody has no idea that we are the main source of our happiness and suffering. We blame everybody else. We blame everybody for our suffering, and we blame everybody else for our happiness. So that's the basis of compassion. That's the basis of compassion. But you have to know it for yourself first. Wisdom wing first. Then you see the people being harmed, the harmers, and you would have compassion for both. That's shocking. There's no reason, unless we have the view of karma, there's no reason to have compassion for the mean person. There's no reason to have compassion for the pedophile. There's no reason to have compassion for the warmonger. There's no logic to it. So this is why, without the view of karma, this concept of compassion in Buddhism is just too bizarre. There's no basis for it. There's no logic to it. This takes time. So the compassion here, the bodhisattva wing, the compassion wing is an intense level of compassion. It's recognizing that all sentient beings are the source of their own pain and their own happiness. But the tragedy is we don't realize it. We're looking out here like maniacs for the causes out there. We're looking in exactly the wrong direction. And because we're convinced that everybody's the cause of my happiness and my suffering, we keep creating more suffering and less happiness for ourselves. That's the tragedy. They say the bodhisattvas have such compassion for all of us sentient beings because of not realizing this concept of cause and effect. We're looking everywhere else but here. Here is the source. Not blame, not punishment, not reward, accountability. So it's a powerful point, a powerful one to start to try and internalize, because it's the exact opposite of what we think. But it's the basis of being able to have compassion for everybody. And it's too hard for us, though, when it comes to suffering. It's just much too hard because it sounds like blame. As soon as we hear that the Ukrainians created the cause to be harmed by the Russians, it's just like panic attack. We can't stand to think about it, Or that your actions in the past created the cause for you to meet a person who's mean to you. It's too shocking for us. But what's curious and utterly fascinates me, we never ask that question about happiness. Because why? Because we take happiness for granted. We have an assumption that we deserve happiness, and we have an assumption we don't deserve suffering, which is why when we discussed equanimity yesterday, and we have this concept that everyone wants to be happy, no one wants to suffer, and then you hear that Mr. Trump or some mean, ugly Mr. Putin wants to be happy, and the first thing we say is, what do you mean he wants to be happy? He doesn't deserve it. So this deserve, we can spend the rest of the week discussing this concept. It's deep in our bones. It's an assumption. That's why we have friends, enemies, and strangers. The only ones we love now are those who are good to me, so they deserve my love. As soon as you cheat on me, you don't deserve my love anymore. That's exactly how we feel. It's instinctive. That's the view of ego, which is rooted in attachment. It's an assumption. Attachment is an assumption. These I have to talk about tonight as well. Karma and the mind, we're going to be discussing this tomorrow, I think, in that module, if anyone's going to be there, the first module of Discovering Buddhism. And then again, of course, we're going to be discussing this at the weekend. But this attachment and aversion, these two main states of mind that underpin all the other neuroses in our mind, as far as Buddha is concerned. They sound so cute and simple. Attachment, anger sounds so cute, but they're hugely profound, hugely deeply ingrained at the level of assumption for us. So the one that runs the show is this assumption of attachment. It's this emotional hunger in us that only wants the nice things, only wants what I want. And the millisecond it doesn't get what I want, doesn't get the nice things, aversion, anger, irritation, upset, annoyance, frustration, depression, this whole spectrum, aversion arises. And the other neurotic states of mind are all rooted in these two. They're primordially deep. So we're driven by this assumption of attachment that I deserve only the nice things and I don't deserve the bad things, which is why we're outraged when bad things happen, which is anger. And when it happens to other people as well, it's anger. I mean, the Buddhist analysis of these states of mind is quite different from how we talk in the modern psychology. It really needs to be, we need to be careful. We need to think about it very carefully if we're taking the Buddhist view, because it's quite different. So we've got to unpack these concepts, So we're driven by this emotional hunger. So where that emotional hunger comes from is this root delusion, as they refer to in Buddhism. There's just like these three poisons Buddha talks about, the three toxic emotions. And the root one is this primordial mistaken sense of a separate, lonely, bereft, concrete me. So already having the assumption of a concrete, separate me is already, and that's rooted in fear, is already this sense of being a half a person. So the main voice of that sense of ego, that mistaken sense of an I, the main voice of it is attachment, the emotional hunger, because I'm not enough. The main energy of attachment is I'm not enough. I don't have enough. It's dissatisfaction. It's an assumption deep in our bones. I don't have enough. And the worst level of it is I am not enough. And that we call low self-esteem in our culture. This is the function of attachment, having practiced attachment for countless lifetimes, Buddha says. So if you're not satisfied, if we're not satisfied, then we're always hungry for something, isn't it? Because you feel what you've got and who you are is not enough. This is what attachment really is. An assumption, because it's so habitual. We become programmed with it in this life. So not having enough and not being enough, then where do you look to find something that's missing out there? The objects of the senses. That's the first level. The obvious level is the objects of the senses. Things, people, sounds, smells. And the utter conviction that when I get that, I'll get happy. That's how we spend our lives, pursuing the nice things and avoiding the ugly things. But the deepest attachment, we'll go into this probably the weekend, I'd say. The deepest attachment, the most primordial, is attachment to how we're seen by others, more than for sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The deepest attachment, the subtlest level of it, the closest to ego grasping, is the craving to be seen as a nice person. I think we'll wait till the weekend for that one. So in order to get a compassion for others, you have to know your own mind. In other words, it's exactly the same in the world. If you see everybody around the world, everybody's obese and overweight and suffering because no one knows nutrition, and they're all suffering, physically sick, you know perfectly well you can have incredible compassion. But what good is that compassion if you can't help them? And how do you help them? You do the wisdom wing, you learn nutrition. Same here. You've got to put yourself together first. Because the Buddha is saying they're all suffering mainly because of their own karma and their own delusions. So we have to understand our mind first. Then we can help others. Then we're qualified. Then we can see others. That's why, as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. As Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. And so we need wisdom, which is what you get from working on yourself. That's the way of putting it. So we can look now then how our compassion is so limited. At the moment, we do have compassion, there's no question, but it's limited. It's usually driven by, it's polluted by attachment, and it's messed up by anger. Because right now, if we have the victim oppressor mode, when you see someone being harmed, you have compassion for the victim, and next second, you have anger for the harmer. So it just destroys it, This is why this level of compassion in the Buddhist view is kind of intense, and it's courageous. I remember Martin Luther King, when I was an old radical lefty years ago, Martin Luther King said, it's good to find fault, it's good to see the problems. He said it's good to be angry, meaning, oh my God, look at the suffering, look at the injustice, look at the poverty, look at the racism. You must see that. But then you say, what can I do to help? And that's really what compassion is. Rather than just ranting and raving, how dare this happen? And then you go crazy because we can't cope because we don't know what to do to help the poor Ukrainians. We don't know what to do to stop the Russians, let's say, so we get frustrated. We either get depressed or we get angry, one or the other, and then we just give up. So this is one thing. Let's talk about this one. What do we do in the face of problems then, So if we have any view of karma, let's just say you're a Buddhist and you've got the view of karma, then straight away you see suffering, you see the bad things happening. At least you have an interpretation of it. At least you have an interpretation. And that's up to us. I mean, there are lots of philosophical views in the world, and we can decide which ones we want to buy into or make up our own. You do what you like, But the philosophical view we live according to now is, if you like, is a samsaric view. That everyone's an innocent victim. No one got asked to get born. It's not anybody else's fault. It's always someone else's fault. And that's how we live our lives. No wonder we go crazy. No wonder we get angry all the time. But even still, even if you don't have a philosophy of karma, if you don't have a philosophy of a creator, at least we can keep some sanity, and maybe we're not sure why bad things happen. But having compassion means, as Martin Luther King said, you see the suffering, and then you say, what can I do to help? So the fact is, if you look at you read the news, you see what's happening in Ukraine, let's say, and then you go, oh my God, this is so terrible, the suffering's unbearable. But then you say, instead of just being hopeless or depressed and not wanting to look at it, or angry, won't help. It just won't help. It's not practical. You then say, what can I do? You must say that first. Well, then clearly you can't do much. If you want to go to you can go to Ukraine if you like and help people. You can do that. Definitely you can do that. But it's not the only place that's suffering. Look everywhere on the planet. Look at your next door neighbors. Look at your own dog, Look at your husband. Everyone's suffering. So the thing is, we can see the world is suffering, even if we're not sure why. I mean, Buddha's got his view of why. That's up to us. At least my feeling is, instead of getting depressed, I can't stand this is just going on, it never ends, or angry, which don't help you one bit. You recognize this is the way the world is. I'm not sure why, but what can I do? So you do, I think as soon as you do one small thing, you're going to be more confident. It'll be better for you, and it'll make you at least help that one dog, help the next door neighbor, help that ant, do something to help somebody. Do what you can right in your life right now. Don't look in the sky for all the big sufferings in the world. Look right now at your life, and you're going to find suffering people. Do something that you can do. And I think that then gives us confidence and courage to do something. We can be useful to somebody. That's all we can do. We can't make all the world become better. I think that's really powerful. Whatever you can do, help some people, help somebody. I think this is what everybody noticed. And when we have big dramas, and I'm sure this is happening in Ukraine right now, people's goodness is coming out like crazy, I bet. But look, during the pandemic, when all the dramas start to happen, the number of people who popped up out of nowhere deciding this is an opportunity to help others. It's incredibly encouraging. It's uplifting, because there's not just suffering in one place, it's everywhere you turn. But to do something, I think, is incredible. So the bodhisattva attitude is like this fierce, long-term attitude of never giving up. As Dalai Lama said, bodhisattvas think in terms of eons, Given the view that your mind will continue, you won't end it when you die, then this idea of bodhicitta, this Sanskrit word, for some reason we always just use the Sanskrit. Technically, it's awakening thought, something like that. And what it's referring to is like the culmination of these series of techniques that I discussed yesterday, starting with equanimity, going through these various techniques. It culminates in love, compassion, and then even there's a particular quality called great compassion. It's a technical term. And that all culminates eventually in this outrageous paradigm shift in the mind that's called bodhicitta, where that person now only thinks of others, because you've done the work on yourself, no reason to think about yourself anymore, which is kind of weird in our culture. Doesn't seem possible. Only be a benefit to others. And then the other view, the other part of bodhicitta is this long-term view of never giving up, working on yourself day by day, month by month, year by year, life by life, perfecting yourself, becoming a Buddha, seeing yourself as a long-term work in progress until you eventually become a Buddha, never giving up to be of benefit to others. That's bodhicitta. It's outrageous. And it's rooted in this level of compassion that they call great compassion. So what that is this attitude, like let's say you see someone suffering and you have compassion, and that means, oh my goodness, look at that suffering. That's terrible. You have empathy. Compassion, empathy, pretty much the same in Buddhism. You see someone suffering and your heart reaches out. That's compassion, pretty incredible. But this next one, which we need to cultivate, is called great compassion. And this is the unique characteristic of the compassion of the Bodhisattva path. And what that one says is, what can I do? That's what Martin Luther King said. That's incredible. That's great compassion. What can I do? See suffering, and then you say, what can I do? That's the amazing one. And that's the one that gives us courage. That's the one that gives us optimism. If you just sit there feeling depressed or angry, you become hopeless. You can do nothing. You can't lift a finger for anybody. You just want to kill yourself or kill everybody else. No good whatsoever. But what can I do? You know, and that's where the wisdom comes in. I mean, I always think of, you know, let's say you're in a war zone and you go into the tent where the doctors sans frontières are working, you know, and they're the ones who've got the skills, haven't they? You walk in, and if you haven't got any wisdom in terms of medicine, think of this. You've got no skill in terms of medicine. You walk into this tent where there's people screaming in agony with their legs broken and, you know, arms off, and they're being, and you don't have any. This is what wisdom is. If you have no skill, you're going to be completely panic stricken, aren't you? But if you can even apply band-aids, you'll feel better. I can do something. What can I do? That's what wisdom means. And that in the Buddhist view, you get that from working on yourself, understanding what your suffering is, understanding its causes, understanding karma, knowing your mind, and you're working on you've got the wisdom now from working on yourself, and that informs your ability to help others. So you might not be able to go off and, you know, magically make the world a better place, but you can do something, and that gives you courage and optimism, because you feel like you're useful. There's nothing more hopeless than feeling I can't do anything. You walk into that tent and you have to walk out again because you can do nothing, not even put a band-aid on. So that's why the wisdom has to come first. Work on yourself first. Put yourself together first, even to some degree, which means give up attachment, give up anger to some degree, give up neuroses, and know that they are the source of your pain. They're the source of your suffering. And then you get this courage, not only compassion, but great compassion. What can I do? You know, it's so powerful. That takes practice, because our first instinct is usually, because we're so busy with our own lives and our own wives and children and babies and jobs. Oh, I can't do much. I'm too busy, you know. But we can do something. Start where you are. Start with your own family. Don't look outside and above everywhere. Look right there. Help your child, help another person, help the next door neighbor, help the ant, help the dog. That it does take courage, because you got to reach outside yourself. And also don't discount the power, the benefit to oneself of being compassionate. Like I said to you, when I first met the teachings, first heard these teachings, these Buddhist teachings, I thought these teachings about bodhicitta, the levels to which you can accomplish these levels of compassion, were insane, abnormal, you know. I didn't know how to tackle it. It was too much for my mind. And then I heard His Holiness Dalai Lama say, if you want to benefit others, practice compassion. You want to benefit yourself, practice compassion. And that's something they stress a lot in Buddhism, but we feel in the West, I think that sounds like selfish. Even the whole concept of karma, the starting point in Buddhist practice is to abide by the laws of karma. And the Buddha would, you know, he'd exhort us to okay, basically Buddha's saying, we all don't want suffering. So he checks out, do you want suffering? If your mind's going to continue in a future life, let's say, do you want it to be a suffering life? So try and imagine, do I want to be killed, lied to, harmed, brutalized, poor, sick? I mean, just think simply. If that's a possibility, and Buddha says it is, the mind continues, then just imagine it. In the future, do you want suffering? Well, thank you, I'd rather not. Then what's the solution? He says, well, don't cause it, because you're the cause of it. So don't cause it. So his first level of practice, entry level junior school, grade 1, he exhorts us he'd suggest we don't kill, don't steal, basically don't harm others. So now this is again the crucial point. We need to remember this. When I was a Catholic, God said the same thing. Jesus said the same thing, exactly the same. Jesus said, don't kill, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner. Buddha says the same, but their reasons are radically different. This is a really important point, to dig a bit deeper behind the Buddha's view, you know. I always quote my Jesuit priest friend whom I asked. I said, by definition, what is a sin? What's a negative action? What makes it wrong? And that's a good point, because we would just say, oh, well, it's just wrong to kill. Why? Oh, I don't know, it's just wrong. You've got to have a logical reason. Well, the Christian's logical reason, I'm not complaining, is because God said. Why? Because God's the boss. That's totally reasonable. If you assert a person who creates the universe, who creates the laws, it's completely reasonable that God is the boss. And if you have that view, then indeed you will not kill because God said. That's not for the Buddha. There's no such concept like that. The Buddha says don't kill. Well, guess what, honey? It's a natural law. Just go do your market research and ask people, do you like being killed? Do you like being killed? We know the answer. It's a natural law. No one likes it. It hurts them. The Christian guy, the priest, said there's some element of natural law in something's being a sin, but what the major thing that makes it wrong is the fact that God said it. This is a huge point. And that's how we think of morality. Oh, well, someone says you shouldn't do it, you get punished. God, you know, God, mummy, the police, the judge, the laws, someone out there will judge you. And that's ego's view. That's how we don't like to be found out. Well, no one saw me do it, I'll get away with it. That's how we think, you know. And for the Buddha, that's like childish. Morality and ethics is a natural law. So what defines killing as a negative action, the main one, is that it harms others. But the reason at the very first level that he exhorts us not to kill and steal and lie is not because it harms others. He says, get what, Robina? It's going to harm you, baby. Because whatever you do and say and think programs you and produces your future experiences. So if you want to be happy, it's like you want to, I mean, it's a natural law of cause and effect. If you want a nice garden in 10 years, you know perfectly well what you have to do. You've got to start planting the right seeds now. Don't wait for 10 years for a nice garden to come. If you want a decent life in the future, even in 20 years, in 10 years, you want to be happy, Buddha says. You have to create the cause to be happy. And bare minimum causes at least don't cause suffering. You're suffering. So the main energy behind karma at the beginning, and this is what I'm saying, we miss in our culture. We just think it sounds selfish. We miss it completely. We get that. The main reason behind our wanting to not harm, not kill, not steal, to live in vows, to live in the discipline of good morality is because we will be the beneficiary of that. You have to know that. You have to want that. We understand that in health. You don't feel guilty when you say, I'm eating well because I want to be healthy. No one says what a selfish person you are. They think you're intelligent. Why are you not killing and not stealing and not lying? Because you want to be not suffering in the future. We've got to get this point. Then eventually you can do it based on genuine compassion. It's got to be compassion for yourself first. Then it's got a real reason to behave well, rather than just wanting not to be punished. You know, we don't want to be punished. That for the Buddha is ridiculous. It's like going to your doctor and she says, don't smoke. And you say, why not? Well, sweetie pie, look at this video because you'll get cancer. So can you imagine how foolish you'd be if you go home and you see she's not there, the doctor's not there. So, oh, she won't see me smoke, so out come the Marlboros, and I won't get cancer. I mean, we would laugh at a person if they thought that, but that's our view of morality. It's very dualistic. For the Buddha, it's a childish view because it assumes there's some boss. I'm not being rude about the concept of creator. That's your view, that's fine. But for the Buddha, it's a mistake. We've made it up. It's a dualistic view of a punisher and a rewarder. There's no view like that in Buddhism, but we hear it like that. But we are accountable, so we become accountable. And then when you realize that your suffering is a fruit of your past actions, you look at everybody else and you go, oh my God, look, we're in the same boat. Then you can have proper compassion. Then you have great compassion. What can I do to help, you know? They say the bodhisattvas are like, every being in the world is like their precious child, you know, they're responsible for all of them. It's a fierce level of compassion. So any questions, people? On Zoom, any questions? Any questions in the room? If not, it's okay. So, okay, if there are, please just put your hand up, please. Okay. So let's look at how our compassion is limited now. Let's look what holds back our compassion. Yes, hello, Juhi, talk to me.
Hi, Venerable. I was having a discussion with a cousin of mine this morning about the Buddhist view on loss of reputation. How would you explain that? Loss of good reputation within, let's say,
someone
families.
criticizing you. Yeah, of course. I mean, well, this is okay. This is back to karma then. So we have to understand karma.
Yes.
So there are 4 ways our karma ripens, 4 ways our present actions will ripen in the future. But crucially here, there are 4 ways right now our experiences arise as a result of our past actions. So the 4 ways, the first one is the type of rebirth you get. So this person is a human being. That's the fruit of virtuous karma, that very much the fruit of non-killing in particular, and in particular living in vows of non-killing, such that at the time of your past death, a virtuous karmic seed was triggered and their mind went to a human mummy's womb. So the first one, the type of rebirth you get, it could be animal, could be human. In this case, we've got the human one. That's the fruit of virtuous actions. The second way is in that mind of that person. We can clearly see you've got your Mother Teresa's and your Hitlers on this planet, right? So the difference between them is they got legs and arms and noses, but the difference is their mind. Would you agree? Their tendencies, isn't it? So we can see we've all got a mixture of positive tendencies and negative tendencies, haven't we? We've got some of us lie naturally, some of us tell the truth naturally. These are all habits that we've brought with us from the past. This is the major point in Buddhism. We are all convinced in the West that all this is coming from my mummy and daddy, right? Isn't it? That our tendencies are, and there's not the way I like to say it, the neuroscientific view, without insulting the neuroscientists, that what goes on in the brain is a physical indicator of what goes on in the mind. There's a difference, the Buddhism would say. So they're tendencies we bring with us. So that could be a tendency, let's say, to be very arrogant and to be rude about other people. That could be a tendency in a person's mind. But let's say in your friend, that's not their tendency. Now we've got the third way that karma ripens, which is called experiences similar to the cause, which is how we're seen and treated by others. And that's this one. So if someone doesn't believe you and you're speaking the truth, that's because of past lying. If someone thinks you're being abusive, but you're not being abusive, that's because you've been abusive in the past. Speaking simply, if someone thinks you're speaking the truth and you are speaking the truth, or even you're lying, that's because you've spoken the truth in the past. So the experience is similar to the cause. So a person being seen as bad, being blamed for things they didn't do. And we can see in this life, this is a major way we all suffer. That's from having done similar. It's called experiences similar to the cause. It's hard. It's kind of like, it's quite logical just as a presentation. You understand? So how you're seen and treated by others is the fruit of those kinds of actions yourself. And karma is pretty personal. So it's in relation to those particular people. That's the answer. And the fourth way your karma ripens is called environmental karma, even the very way the physical world itself impacts upon us. Do you understand?
Yeah. Yes.
That's the principles. Yeah.
And our follow-up question, and our tendencies could make it very difficult for us to accept that.
Well, that's
accept
right.
The criticism, naturally.
No,
the criticism, the blame.
Yeah, and that's because we have this intense, the deepest attachment of all. I said I was going to talk about it the weekend, but we can mention it here. The deepest attachment we have, the most primordial, that's hardest one to identify, more than for sex and drugs and rock and roll and all the sense objects, is attachment to being seen as a nice person. It's the deep hunger within us. And I think in our lives, this is the deepest suffering we all have when people turn against us. People don't like us. We even think they don't like us. We are shattered. We are craving to be seen as a nice person. This is really the deepest problem, the deepest suffering we all have, the deepest attachment, the deepest emotional hunger. Do you understand?
Yes. So this is a personal experience for my cousin, and she turned to me for advice and asked for the Buddhist view. I kind of sort of explained it along the lines of, but what is the actual advice to someone who is going through it or is in the thick of it?
Okay, whether we like karma, whether we think of karma or not, the advice, it takes time to do it. We've got to look at the assumption. What is the assumption? We've got to ask the question. We've got to ask and analyze this and look into it, darling. What we have to ask ourselves, I wonder why I need other people to approve of me. We never question this. We've got to, in other words, there's an assumption that we're not enough. There's an assumption that even when I didn't do that wrong thing, we need to be seen to be good. We've got to ask the question, why isn't it we're not content with the fact that we acted properly? So this is the real question to ask. We've all got it. So it's to learn to realize we are okay. In myself, I'm okay. But this is an immensely difficult one because it's the last attachment to go.
Yeah.
They have a saying, you know, the yogis up in the mountains who've given up everything are still thinking about what the people in the village are thinking about them. So we can analyze it. We need to. We've got to look into why is it we crave to be approved of, crave to be liked, because we don't think we're enough. That's what's behind it. So that's why the wisdom wing is learning to heal ourselves and become who we are and become fulfilled within ourselves. And then, as our mothers would tell us, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words can never hurt you. Did you hear that? Did your mother teach you that?
Yes, she did. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Or it becomes water off a duck's back. But we can see how hard it is because that's the deepest pain of all. So just to know that we are okay ourselves. We have to learn to nourish ourselves. There's a lovely saying in the West, we have to become our own person. But this is take practice, sweetheart. It's not going to work overnight.
Yeah, just kind of last comment is what? Families of such people come together. It's like a bunch of people with the same sort of craving to reputation kind of get together.
Yes.
That's what our discussion was with my cousin, that I too was in your spot some time ago. I too had this craving. So I'm not sure what to tell you. Yeah.
I know, but this takes time. It takes time to work on our minds, you know. We've got to analyze these things and at least say to them, well, you know, some of us love you. It's all right. Be happy with that. 17 people can love us, but one doesn't. We have a panic attack. So at least be happy with the ones who do like us. Get nourishment from that, you know. Tell her that.
Yes. Thank you. Understood.
Okay, darling. Thank you. So let's look at why it is our compassion is sort of limited. Why, you know, well, the logic is, yes, because we have attachment and the three poisons, you know. I mean, our compassion. So this is, okay, let me use examples first. The simple example I use, a little story analogy for what equanimity is, how necessary, how crucial equanimity is, and how illogical we are not having it. So in other words, let's say there's Yogesh. He says he's a stranger to me. I haven't met Yogesh, let's say. He's a friend of, let's say he's a friend of Lana's. And she tells me that poor old Yogesh, this bloke she knows, gets terrible migraines. And, you know, I'll go, oh, does he, the poor fellow, really? Does he? Oh, dear. And I try to be compassionate, but I don't know Yogesh. I don't care about Yogesh. He hasn't touched my life, has he? You get my point here? It's very simple. We don't question this, but that's what a stranger is. You can have some empathy, but then after 5 minutes, I'm going, you know, pass the tea, pass the sugar, Lana, and we're gossiping again. And I've forgotten all about Yogesh. We all understand this. Now, let's say we meet. And then we fall in love and he moves me in. You know, he lives down at number 6 and he moves me into number 6. Now, suddenly he's gone from stranger category to beloved category, hasn't he? He's now friend. He's an object of attachment. And now look at my compassion. People say, oh, Robina's so compassionate. She spends all her money on Yogesh. She thinks of him day and night. She's so kind to him, right? Because he's now a beloved. But now he cheats on me and moves in with Lana. And now I chuck him out. And now he's in the enemy category. And now I hope he suffers with his migraines. Isn't it? You get my point. So what's the difference? The point of equanimity is this very simple point. You ask Yogesh when he was my stranger about his migraines. He would tell you they were unbearable. You ask him when he's my beloved about his migraines. He will tell you exactly the same. And when he's my enemy, his migraines are as painful. In other words, the pain of the migraine of the friend, enemy, and stranger is identical pain. But I only care when he's my friend. I want him to suffer when he's my enemy, and I don't care when he's a stranger. So it's just plain irrational. Because from his point of view, 1 minute a stranger, 1 minute a friend, 1 minute an enemy. He doesn't sit there thinking, oh, my headache doesn't matter just because I'm Robina's stranger. It's a meaningless concept that we label on people, but they're such powerful labels. We believe they've got some intrinsic truth, you know. But I mean, his suffering is identical, whether he's my friend, my enemy, my stranger. That's the simple point we're trying to prove. Then, of course, seeing this, we now begin this process of these techniques of beginning to grow this genuine love and compassion. And then, of course, because we realize all sentient beings are, like the person who was sitting here yesterday said, we all decide for ourselves, all being self-centered. What we start to realize, we don't know how to make ourselves happy, and we don't know how to make ourselves stop suffering. And on the basis of this, we will have compassion to want to help everybody, including the friends, enemies, and strangers, because they're all the same. So in other words, it's getting ourselves out of the equation. And this is quite radical, it's quite extreme, it's quite hard. Because we see everybody in terms of how they see us. It's so clear. We see the whole world through the lenses of our needs. Like I said yesterday, we should be sort of shocked at our self-centeredness. We see the universe into these three categories. That's it. Those who support me, who fulfill my needs, I adore them. Those who actively don't, I dislike them. And those who do neither, I don't care. It almost seems so simple, but it's really obvious and it's really profound. So to go beyond these three assumptions is not that easy, Of course, it takes time. It's enormous. And then this is why, when I first heard it, I thought, you mean I've got to have compassion for everybody? That sounds exhausting. I mean, we know what it's like to have love and compassion for just your family. It's hard work. You mean I've got to be that for everybody? Well, yeah, one step at a time, it's okay. But these techniques here, using is, surprising to us. When we think of meditating on compassion, we think of it as some kind of gooey sort of thing, sentimental. But this here, the benefit, the approach here is using logic to argue with ego's misconceptions. This is very powerful, And just a simple example, Yogesh's headache is the same. However, whoever sees him, whether we hate him or love him, it's got nothing to do with his headache. His headache's awful. And he feels exactly the same, whether I label a stranger or friend or enemy. It's clearly irrelevant. But this is how we see the world. And this is the Buddhist approach, that the whole world, as Lama Zopa puts it, the whole world appears back to us through the lenses, this is my word, of whatever's going on, through whatever's going on in our mind. So if attachment in my mind, everything will look lovely. Aversion, ugly. Ignorance, couldn't care. These are the three poisons, as Buddha calls, and all the other neurotic states of mind are rooted in these three. It's kind of interesting analysis. So our compassion is limited now, even for those we love. I mean, you might have, if I've got incredible compassion when I'm in love with Yogesh, everything's all brand new and delicious and he's perfect. When you're first in love with somebody, we know that because attachment has gone mad. And I spend day and night helping him. But I'm sorry, if he keeps moaning and complaining and endlessly spending my money and never stopping having his boring old headaches, at some point I'll give him up. I'm sorry. You get my point? I mean, we're very limited. I mean, even that child you adore. But after night of screaming and shouting, I'm sorry, your compassion is exhausted. And this is what we've got to see. I mean, the Buddhist approach is we can have limitless compassion. This is hard to imagine. And the only reason we can imagine that is because we understand the Buddha's view that we can rid our mind of attachment and anger, which is the wisdom wing. It takes time, of course. Then there's compassion of these bodhisattvas is limitless. That's when I first heard it. It seemed almost hard to imagine the possibility. But it's all in the Buddhist teachings, all laid out, structured. You can see it, the levels of capability that we can accomplish. So our compassion is limited now because of attachment. And this is because it's so normal in the world. And this is why this sounds abnormal. It's like extreme levels of compassion. And it is indeed, if we compare with most of us how we are. But having the view that it's possible is kind of encouraging, And that's why I think if you just look at ordinary examples of people in the world, on a planet, I always think of Dalai Lama as such a good example to the world. He's not sitting in some cave. He is, this human being. And he really hasn't, he's like 80-something now. 86 or something. What is he now? 86 or 87? 86, I think. Since he was 16, that's 70 years, he hasn't given up. Think about it. He was appointed to be the boss of Tibet when he was 16, okay, to run the show. It was in the midst of the communists taking his country over. Since he's 16, he hasn't stopped. Everyone can see that. diplomatically, socially, politically, religiously, scientifically. He works in every area on the planet, bringing people together, you know, and trying to help change the situation in Tibet for 70 years. I think anybody with half a brain can see that he's a happy, perky guy. I'm sorry, you know, he is. But we just go, oh, that's just the Dalai Lama. He must watch his breath or something. You know? He must be mindful. I mean, excuse me. Somehow, if he's the proof of the pudding, and anybody can see that he's a happy, funny fellow, and he cracks jokes about his enemies. He's not having mental breakdowns and stress. He tries to act normal and says he gets angry and things, but you can sort of tell this is not true, you know. So, I mean, if that's the proof of the pudding, I think, well, whatever he does, I wouldn't mind trying it. We should sort of see it like that, rather than, oh, that's just the Dalai Lama, you know, he's up in the sky. That's insulting him. He's the proof of the pudding of something. Well, what we're discussing here is the methodology that he's used. So that's, you know, good enough for me. See, I think just seeing one example of a person, you know, who's accomplished something, that's obviously the proof. If you see a really good tennis player, they're the proof that tennis works. It's encouraging. That's why we need examples, you know, not just theories in a book. And so the thing that's also here that's really is pretty intense in the Buddhist view is that we're not set in stone. I mean, in the 20th century, you know, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of this, the Dalai Lama has been working with science for like 40 years now, and there's incredible things that come out of this. And many of the findings about neuroplasticity, we're not stuck with the brain we're born with, you know, are really the result of the work on the people putting, you know, wires on the brains of meditators. You know, I remember one French fellow who was quite well known, a French monk, that had stuck wires on his brain just he was sitting there, not even doing anything esoteric, just thinking about compassion, meditating on compassion. That he reconfigured his brain. From thinking about compassion, your brain changes. And one scientist said it's the greatest finding of the 20th century, that you're not stuck with the brain you're born with. Well, I'm happy we're catching up with Buddha. He's been telling us quietly for 2,500 years that I'm not stuck with the brain we're born with, you know, that we can change our minds. We can mold our minds into any shape we like. So, of course, the Buddhist analysis is not about reconfiguring the brain. It's about reconfiguring the thoughts, the mind. That's the Buddha's expertise. And that might often be evident to us, you know, but that's really what the Buddha is about. And that should be incredibly encouraging to us, because look at how we feel. Look at the way ego works. We instinctively feel this is who I am and I'm stuck with it. And of course, we identify mainly with our negative qualities. This is the irony of ego. I haven't met a person yet who tells me they start, you know, I can't stop thinking good thoughts about myself, Robina. I've never met a person like that. Not yet. We're addicted to misery, isn't it? We're addicted to, I'm bad, I'm this, I'm fat, I'm thin, I'm no good, I'm not intelligent. I think everybody on the planet, I haven't met a person on the planet who's not utterly dissatisfied, even just what their body looks like, you know. Because we're dissatisfied. This is dissatisfaction. We're dissatisfied, which is a function of attachment. Dissatisfied with who I am and what I've got. So always finding fault, you know, and we assume, this is the tragedy of ego, we assume this is me set in stone. I am this kind of person. I'm angry. I'm an angry person. I'm a depressed person. I'm a jealous person, or I'm a whatever it is, you know, we identify ourselves. And the Buddhist view is the key function of all these delusions. We talked last night, I think. The key function of these unhappy states of mind is that they exaggerate. They exaggerate. So attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of something. Aversion exaggerates the ugliness of something. You know, these two, we run between these two. And then we believe it's true. This is the tragedy. So we're set in stone. We're stuck in stone. You know? So I think even having some confidence that we're not set in stone, that we can mold our mind into any shape, that can be encouraging. And that demands, of course, first establishing what is the status quo. So you might say, I'm an angry person. That's exaggerating. No, you're not an angry person. There is anger there. What we do is we paint the whole of ourselves with that one brush, don't we? And that's what we do to other people. You know, Yogesh was a saint 1 minute, and then he was suddenly a sinner. And I exaggerated both. Attachment over-exaggerated his deliciousness, And then because he did one action to harm me, anger exaggerated his badness. And we set him in stone. We do this automatically. So seeing this aspect of these delusions is very encouraging to see. So we have to loosen the grip of these stories, you know, be more reasonable and not identify ourselves with the unhappy qualities. I know there's a nice saying in Christianity, maybe the Catholics, I'm not sure. You don't criticize the sinner, you criticize the sin. You don't criticize yourself. You need to criticize your anger because it hurts you, it's pain. And that's the first step. You've got to see the pain it causes you. Then you can see the pain it causes others. And that's, again, the whole point about karma, which we miss. You've got to see the pain that your anger and your depression and your anxiety and your jealousy cause you. That's like compassion for ourselves, which we totally miss. We just beat ourselves up instead, you know. This is a tragedy. So we've got to have this kindness towards ourselves, which means being responsible for owning the qualities that harm me, my old ridiculous habits, my anger, my jealousy, my depression, my anxiety. Look at the harm they do to me. We completely miss this in our culture. We love to find fault and beat ourselves up instead. This is a tragedy. You know? Then when we're kinder to ourselves and see them, we'll own them and we'll realize they're not set in stone. They don't define me. I mean, there's extensive teachings in the Buddhist psychological model when you study it in more depth, extensive teachings proving logically how these unhappy states of mind have no basis in reality, so therefore can be eventually eliminated from your mind. It's a slow process. And that's rooted in there being conceptual stories. Buddha's a cognitive therapist, and I'm not kidding. We really start to work on our minds. You know, we're going to be able to see what's going on in the mind beneath the emotional component. This is one of the major points, and I'm sure we're going to go into this. Probably tomorrow is a better time. We start to realize, we start to drill down into our minds beneath the emotional component, which is when it's physical. Beneath that, we're going to hear the conceptual stories, these scripts in our head, and then we can reconfigure, rewrite those scripts. It's really like that. That really is, Buddha really is a brilliant cognitive therapist, but that doesn't seem evident to us. Because the best we know about Buddhism is something about being mindful or something, you know. So the work on ourselves is the first one. And then to the degree that we have any understanding of our own mind is the degree to which we can help others. It's so clear, you know. How can you have empathy for others if you haven't got empathy for yourself? How can you have empathy for others' pain and their anger and their jealousy and see the suffering it causes them and the harm they're doing to others if you can't see yours? It's a huge point here. This is the wisdom wing. Then we can do the compassion wing after that. Or the degree to which you know anything about your own mind is the degree to which you can connect with others. That's the point, I think. That's the biggest one. Anybody else here? Sweetheart? No one? No, in the chat? Nothing in the chat. All right. Okay, what else, people? Any questions? Nothing?
I have a question.
Oh yeah, who's there? Hello, Fernando. Yes, sweetheart. Yes, just talk to me.
It's in relation to attachment. You said yesterday that, I mean, there's certain attachment that makes us think in the wrong way because it's from ignorance. Well, I guess it's all attachment. But then again, when you're an Arya Bodhisattva until the 7 Bhumi, which I guess before you reach the level of nirvana of an arhat, can you transform that attachment to use it to help sentient beings? It's what I understood when you were mentioning this.
Yeah, no, listen, I think, okay. Yes, at a certain stage in our development, we will have eradicated attachment completely from our mind. Exactly, at some point. Highly advanced, yes. But even before you get anywhere near the Vajrayana, Fernando, even in the Mahayana Sutra teachings, you can utilize attachment. Of course we can. So I'll just use an example. It's very simple. I mean, what I mean is, you know, it's like if you're going to, in other words, first of all, there's the levels of practice, as you know perfectly well. The very first level is we have to be very disciplined. We control the body, control the speech, control the mind. There's not much wriggle room. You're really drilling down and becoming a really cautious, person, transforming your body, speech, and mind, understanding clearly how attachment causes suffering, trying to lessen attachment, lessen the anger, lessen the jealousy. That's the practice, and it's really full on. But then as you become more capable, you're then moving towards the compassion wing, and you're now connecting with others. So let's just say you're not going to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll and go to the mountains and become a monk and get realizations. Let's say 99% of us won't do that. Let's say you're going to get a wife or a husband or a dog or whatever people do these days. People are very flexible. Let's say it's a wife, old-fashioned. And you got to have babies. Let's say that's a common way that people live their lives, isn't it? So if you're going to do that, do you not think it's, and you're going to have attachment, there's not a possibility until you're high being not to have attachment. It's going to be there, flavoring everything you do. So if you're going to have a relationship, honey child, at least choose somebody that you're going to be attached to who's kind and ethical and nice. Why be attached to some peanut who's going to beat you up? How idiotic. You get my point? That's being wise with your attachment. If you're going to be attached to food, at least eat decent food so you can be healthy, so you can keep working on yourself. Why be attached to heroin? How silly. So in a sense, you can be more spacious when you get to the bodhisattva approach. Yes, it's more spacious. And then you can even, for example, there's lots of ways you can do that. If you're going to be useful in the world, you got attachment until you hardly realize. So then you make sure that the object of your attachment at least useful to you, the good, and of course the main one is you underpin all of your life with this compassion and bodhicitta. Then that really helps transform. Or then if, let's say, you're going to be attached to food, you can't stop the attachment. So you don't just shove the food in mindlessly. You do a little aspiration first. You imagine offering it to others, and then you offer it, there's a skillful means. That's in the Mahayana component. In the first level, there's not much wriggle room, but you've got to be grounded in that first, and then you can start being more spacious. But it demands to be conscious, You've got to be aware. Do you understand?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. What else, people? Some questions? Yes.
So I was thinking also of this bodhicitta aspiration, and you were saying we can always be helpful to someone, but what about if that's being driven by your craving to be seen as a nice person?
Of course. No, that's the danger. Again, the same here. You don't wait until you've completely given up attachment before you risk doing something good without being attached to it. You're going to be. You can't help that. But if you're conscious, if you're conscious and aware of your mind more and more and more, you're not fully advancing. You've got attachment to reputation, but you know that, but you still at the same time want to develop the compassion. So you've got to take the risk, but you've got to be conscious. You've got to be aware and tell yourself to shut up and attempt to have a good motivation. You can't wait till you're perfect before you do anything. It's not possible.
Well, I'm thinking in the case of myself, I just finished a 29-year career of teaching because I got to this place of total burnout.
Yep.
And just felt like in the last year, maybe I felt like I was trying to help, and I just forgot me completely.
And you what?
I forgot me completely.
I understand.
Whatever me is,
No, I know.
I need to.
Yeah. So then the question is, from that.
I mean, I guess how do I check that motivation or what?
Well, darling, okay. This is a good example then. So I don't know your mind that well, but you just said something, so I'll take it on face value. There you were for 29 years, and you were taking care of other people. You were helping other people. Your job description is helping other people, right? So then, you're ordinary person. That means you've got attachment, which means here especially, you have attachment to being seen and approved of. So if every single class people threw things at you and all your colleagues abused you, you probably wouldn't have lasted 29 years. Do you agree? So you must have got some nice feedback. So that, in a way, knowing that it's reputation, but also being reasonable. If you don't have a good reputation, sweetheart, you can't function. So be happy to have a good reputation, but just to be conscious of it. So now, so the thing is, in our culture, we think we sacrificed our life, we helped other people, and now I've got to think of myself. That's in a sense what you're saying. But no. If you had a lot of attachment to reputation through those years, you would have been utterly miserable the whole time. Anybody just didn't like you for 1 second, you'd be destroyed. But if you didn't mind so much what people thought of you, and you were really genuinely happy to help other people, you would have got much delight from it automatically. Don't be ashamed of that. if you're really kind and compassionate, that feeds us tremendously. So be happy about that. Be glad. And you'd probably got some nourishment, surely, from it, or not.
Oh, yes. I feel incredibly grateful, but I also feel incredibly grateful now that I have this space and listen to Dharma and practice.
No, well, exactly. So that's perfect. That's not a problem. I think, see, what happens in our culture, I think we talk about how, especially if you're in the helping professions and you're out there teaching or you're in the hospitals, and then the way we talk about how we take care of ourselves is when you go home and have a massage and have a spa and think about ourselves. That's true. But the Buddhist view is, just putting it this way, let's say you're an advanced person and you've given up attachment and anger and jealousy, you wouldn't be exhausted. You just have a good sleep and you'll still be happy. So what makes us unhappy isn't just physical stress. What makes us unhappy is attachment and aversion. So attachment is a junkie that only wants everything to be lovely. So the more we have that attachment, the more stressed you're going to be and the more angry you're going to be and the more exhausted you're going to be, because when you have to work really hard, you're going to get exhausted. And then we have aversion to that. So we're swinging between attachment and aversion. But as we progress and get less attachment and less aversion, you have more kindness, you will also have more happiness. So happiness in Buddhism comes, yes, have a massage, yes, have a little weep and a sleep. But happiness comes from being virtuous and not being delusional. That's the point. And if we suffer, it's not because you worked hard for other people, it's because we've got attachment and aversion. It's a heavy one to hear, but it's liberating when we can hear it. So you're a reasonable human being, honey, and now you've got to shift and you do other things to deepen your knowledge. How amazing. Well done. You lasted 29 years. I can't believe it. I'd have dead children in my class if it were me. So. Because that's the thing, we know it's true and we say it, but it all sounds like Pollyanna, or you get so much pleasure when you help people. Now, we do get pleasure if they love us in return. Like, look at the way we have when we give our children and our beloveds gifts. All we're doing when we're thinking of giving the gift is how they're going to like it and thank us. But that's getting the attachment to oneself. But if we can really be genuinely thinking of others and there isn't much attachment and aversion, that gives tremendous pleasure, because pleasure, a happy mind, really does come from being virtuous. So it's just navigating our own mind and seeing these different things, you know. And we're all humans, okay. Do you understand? Good. Very good points. What else, people? Yes.
I have a question about karma.
Yeah.
I conceptually understand the mind comes from before and continues on. And
right, yes.
Is fine right now.
That's right.
But all these trillions of minds,
yeah.
Where do they come from? Like, do they start somewhere?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Yeah, exactly. No, it's as His Holiness said one time when he's working with all the scientists, he says, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So the idea, because we all instinctively have a belief that there has to be a first moment, a first cause. I mean, the Christians, the Catholics, have an intensive philosophy how there can logically be a capital F, capital C first cause, and that's called God. Buddha absolutely philosophically and experientially says not viable. So this is really this idea of there being something that's first, which implies it didn't have a cause, is impossible, not viable, not doable for the Buddha. It's a massive point. We've got to think about it logically, you know. So minds are beginningless and endless, but so is the universe. As far as the Buddha is concerned, the universe, certainly in the Vajrayana model, is made of the 4 elements, and then there's minds, and that's it. And they're all beginningless and endless. I mean, this sounds hilarious. It's like ridiculous for us. It's like a joke, because we all assume there has to be a first moment of everything. There is a first moment of this lid, but it went from the second it turned into a lid, it had masses of previous stuff. So you keep tracking back. I mean, you know, you start this, you look at this and you start looking for the causes of it. You will get back to the first second of this universe. And then you have to ask the question, what was that and what were the causes of that? And it's going to be matter since beginningless time. It's a demented concept. It just so seems to argue in the face of anything logical, but for the Buddha, it's the totally only logical conclusion. Everything that exists now is necessarily beginningless. As nutty as it sounds, I mean, it's hysterical. I mean, we can't even remember one lifetime, forget about billions. And it just sounds absurd to say that your mind is beginningless. It's just like laughable. But we've got to analyze why it's larval, because we have another assumption instead. That it can't be that way, but there's no logic to it. It can't be. We just assume it.
Yeah, although I can see how the idea of it is.
You see how what?
Like the idea of it could help us not think, I have to do everything in this life.
Well, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Big long-term view.
Do it all,
Exactly.
I need the perfect couch. And,
It's a long-term view, it's true. I mean, it's a very, very different view. It's hilarious. I mean, we like to think about how the universe is kind of billions and billions of years old. But no, it's interesting, isn't it? So the principle is cause and effect. That if you posit the concept of cause and effect, you can't, by definition, can't posit a first cause, because it implies it had no cause, and that's not viable. That's the simple principle to stick with, in your mind. Do you understand? What else? Yes.
What would be a thought or a check to
Start again.
What would be a thought or a self-check on the attachment to how others perceive?
I can't get your words. Do you mind putting your mask down just for a second? I'm so sorry, darling. Forgive me. Start again.
Better.
Go on.
What would be a check for us when it comes to attachment of how others see us?
Oh, okay.
You said that this is
One of the deepest,
one of
the deepest attachments. Yeah.
Even let's say I started a job yesterday,
Yes.
2 weeks ago,
Yes.
and I'm helping a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And I say, doing this selflessly for others. And I could believe this story, but how would I double?
No, I know, darling. Of course. Listen. Underneath all this is the thing. This is the deepest delusion in the Buddhist view, is this assumption so instinctive, so primordial, that we take it as a given in our culture. That there's this, the deepest mistaken view in the mind is a sense of this concrete me. And this sounds so absurd, but the sense of a concrete me that's necessarily separate from others, that itself is the most primordial delusion. And this sense of a separate self is necessarily fear-based and is necessarily profoundly limited. We have a very limited sense of a self. And that means the main voice that comes from that is then this emotional hunger to get something. So why would you feel you need to get something? Because you assume you don't have it. So the assumption of ego is I'm nothing. So attachment, the more we concretize a sense of a self, the more emotional hunger we have for something out there, to the assumption being when I get it, it'll fill me up. The deepest assumption is that I'm not enough. So that's why we have to have other people tell me I'm okay. In other words, we don't even think we exist until you say, Robina, you're a nice person. So in other words, the assumption is I'm nothing. The assumption of ego is so ironic. It's like I'm nothing. So the deepest hunger is to have a person smile at me, smile back to me, to make me feel, oh, phew, I must be okay. So the assumption is we think we're nothing. That has to be the basic one. So it's not just having not enough so you get more cakes and more boyfriends, but the praise and the approval is the deepest, most primordial, because we just think we're this fractured nothing person. It sounds so odd to say it that way, but that's what it is. So we have to keep checking and analyzing. Well, I mean, even just to think, now even think of loneliness. Think of loneliness. So there's a common disease in this culture more than anything. What is loneliness? Think about it. There's nobody to share my thoughts with. There's nobody to talk to. So we've got to analyze. I'm not trying to be brutal. What is it about my thoughts that somehow aren't enough that I have them? What is it that makes them useless just because I have them? What makes them more valuable as soon as another person hears them? That is just, again, the proof of how we just think we're nothing. It's totally primordial in all of us. So every second we are thinking of what people are thinking about us. We're thinking about having conversations with people. We have an experience. We're trying to tell somebody about it. And then if we're lonely, it's got no one to share them with. Therefore, that my thoughts are nothing. Therefore, I'm worthless. It's so bizarre if you analyze it. But this is how we all are. It's the nature of being this fractured, deluded person. This is the Buddha's analysis. Ego grasping, the root delusion, which gives rise to this emotional hunger, which gives rise to anger, gives rise to arrogance, all these dramas. So it's a very powerful kind of way of seeing it. So it doesn't mean we should isolate ourselves and never talk to anybody. No. But look at some people are never satisfied, are always feeling lonely. No one's there to love me. No one loves me. No one sees me. No one hears me. This is our deepest suffering. That's why we have to be heard and listened to. It's how we can be kind to each other, hear each other, listen to each other, to begin to make us feel like we're real people. And then we can start nourishing ourselves. Look at children. You need to listen to a child. But if that child, I mean, some children, you can see it, have the best mothers on the planet, but they always feel mummy didn't love me. Another child would be quite content in themselves because they're born with not much of this attachment. And even though their mummy's a creep, they don't mind. We can see people like that. But we always assume it's because my mother didn't love me enough. No, it's because you got to the bottomless pit of neediness to be approved. And no matter what approval you get, it's never enough. This is our disease. Isn't it? I mean, this voice innocent all the time, always trying to talk to somebody. We're trying to share our thoughts with somebody. We're trying to, as soon as we have an unusual experience, we want to tell somebody because we don't want to value our own thoughts. We don't value even who we are. We don't even hear our own thoughts. We walk around like this dead person. Are we communicating here? So we've got to nourish ourselves. We've got to become our own person. It's the most wonderful saying in the West. And it just takes time. I am okay. I don't need verification. I mean, we need feedback. We've got to be sensible, but we hungrily need the feedback. In other words, we don't think we're anyone unless someone says we're somebody. So we just got to look at it and analyze every day and catch it and verify ourselves and be content with ourselves. Practice it every day. It takes time. It's my God, it's huge. Are we communicating? Yeah, hang on. Yep.
So in situations where you can see suffering and you try to think compassionately and physically be compassionate to someone, but they don't want it.
Yes.
How do you?
Well, okay. See, compassion doesn't always mean you have to express it. If you can see a person, let's say you've been an alcoholic and then you see another person who's an alcoholic and you have compassion and you start going up to them and giving them advice, honey, they're not ready for your advice. They're going to tell you to back off. So one is having the empathy and seeing where they're coming from and knowing the causes, but as to whether you do something, that demands wisdom. That demands wisdom. And that means you have to know the right time to say something. And maybe that could be your best friend and you know they're an alcoholic and you know all about what they're doing, but you don't open your mouth because they're not ready for your advice. You just love them for who they are. So it takes wisdom so compassion is the recognition of the suffering, but it's the wisdom that enables us to know what to do when, and maybe there's nothing we can do because the person doesn't want it. And that's part of our problem. And that's now what our compassion is like, because we're all full of attachment. And suddenly you've discovered the method of how to stop being an alcoholic and you want to tell the whole world and you run around shoving it down everybody's throat. You understand? And that's just called attachment. You understand? Yeah. That's not compassion at all. Yeah. So compassion is the empathy, but wisdom is the ability to know what to do when. And that's the one that we often lack. Do you understand? Yeah. What else, people? Yes, sweetheart, go. Good. Yeah, who is it?
She had her hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Venerable.
Hello, sweetheart.
I have a question. So if we were like focusing on caring for ourselves and self-care and self-love, is that looked upon as like being too compassionate for ourselves? Like,
well, give an example of self-love. How would it express itself for you?
Perhaps setting boundaries to family and friends so
okay.
that.
So can we use Buddhist words here, please? Can I use some Buddhist words?
Yes, please.
Good, thank you. So what you're saying is, at the moment you've got, you're a normal person and you have attachment and you have aversion and you've got a few qualities. Is that right? You've got a bit of attachment, a bit of aversion, maybe, yeah?
Yes, lots of it.
And because of that, when you're close to some people, you can't handle it, right? Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, good, darling. So then you recognize that you're attached, and because they behave in a way that makes you have aversion and anger and get upset and confused, you can't handle it. So out of intelligence and respect for yourself, you would not go to that party.
Right.
It's called intelligent, darling.
Okay. right.
Are you with me? But
Yeah.
you don't do it. You don't go, oh, I can't handle that ugly old grandfather. He's a creep. I'm not going to go near him. You recognize that you're the one who's got the limitation, because when you're the one who can't handle it, so you have to know where you are at and what you are capable of. That's the point about it. That's called self-respect.
I see.
Don't do it because, grandpa's a creep and I can't handle him. You do it because you are not capable of handling grandpa. Don't put the blame on grandpa. Put it on yourself because you're limited. So you're being humble and you're recognizing your own limitations. That's all I'm trying to say. You get my point?
Yes.
That's the way to put it. So the problem is your own attachment and your own aversion, your own anxiety. We've got to recognize our problems that are what limit us from handling difficult situations. So then when you get better at that and you give up attachment and give up aversion, then you're able to go to the party and go to the family, and it will be easy because you'll know it's fine. I can love them for who they are, and you won't be affected by them. So it's intelligence, actually, knowing what you're capable of. That's the Buddhist way of putting it. But you've got to recognize the reason you can't handle it is because of your own neurotic states of mind. Do you understand that point?
Yes.
Good, darling.
Thank you.
Good. Jivrab, yes. Talk to me.
Hello.
Yes.
I have a question about someone who's very close to me, who has a sibling, like a younger brother, who is completely dependent on them, like in every way, financially, emotionally, every way possible.
How old is the sibling?
Sibling is 41.
How old
and
is
the
the
brother is sibling is 36 and the person is 40.
Not
Yes.
6.
No.
So what's the question?
So the question is there a way that karma will end, or will this clinginess and depending on the brother be lifelong?
Is there a way what?
That this type of karma will end, or will this
I'd rather not answer
or
it like
dependence be
I'd rather not
lifelong?
answer it like karma, darling. It sounds too concrete. The point is, is this 36-year-old person really seriously mentally ill, or just a bit ungrown up?
The latter, ungrown up. That's what it seems.
And it's a male, is it? It's a boy, it's a man?
Yes, male. Mm-hmm.
And the sibling, I bet, is a woman, yeah? Your friend is a woman, yeah?
That's also a man.
Oh, that's also a man.
2 brothers.
2 brothers, so it's not a healthy relationship, is what you're saying.
It seems like, so the relationship right now, what it seems like is that the younger one is completely just sort of misusing the older brother's love for him, in the sense.
Exactly. And so the older brother probably feels responsible and gets guilty.
Yes.
Okay, well then that's your friend, is it? He's your friend, is he?
The
older
I
one.
hate to say it, but it's my husband.
Oh, your husband. Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
I understand now, darling.
I don't want to lie. So
sweetheart, so then, your husband, because, family relationships, for a start, is a very strong one, isn't it? That's a very intense karmic history with each other. So then your husband probably suffers tremendously because of this, right?
100%. And the issue is that because of this person, all his anger, anxiety, frustration, everything comes out on me. For even the smallest thing.
Blames your husband. Huh?
Yes.
Well, sweetheart, I don't know. Your husband's got a lot of work to do. Do you think he's capable?
No, absolutely not.
Well, then your job, honey child, is to love your hubby for who he is and let him get on with it. You can't, your husband's got a problem. The husband's brother's got a problem. And honey child, you have a problem. So the advice is for you. You've got to, does your husband endlessly talk about this brother?
Not at all. Not to me.
Oh, thank goodness.
He just is so engrossed in him. Like, it's just very unhealthy for an outsider to see it.
I understand. So the problem for you is what? You get angry with your husband because of it, right?
I try to not get angry. I'm past anger now, but it's just that I clearly see that the brother is completely just using
I
him and
understand.
just sitting
My
and doing
feeling
nothing.
is here, but my feeling, Jivrab, is that we should be talking about you, not about your husband. That your practice, this is your husband, you've made this choice, and your husband comes along with his brother. This is the way it is. So you've got to really look at your own hunger, your own attachment, your own anger, and learn to let go of that and love your husband for who he is and do your best to do that. This is the real answer. It's about you, sweetheart.
Okay.
Are we communicating?
Yes, we are.
You really got to leave it alone. I mean, it's not going to be easy. There's always going to be something in every relationship, but this is your choice. You've chosen to be with this husband. You don't have a plan to leave him. So you've chosen this husband, and this is what your husband comes with, his younger brother. So, darling,
Yes.
you've got to learn to do your best and be content and love your hubby for who he is, and don't try to change him.
Sure. I mean, the problem is that the brother is trying to like ruin the relationship between me and my husband. He's saying things like we are mixing poison in his food and things like that.
I understand that. So what can you do about that?
If you could help me
What?
as to what I can do about it besides
Yeah, I mean,
what
what
you
can
just
you
said,
do? You
that I have
can't
to
do
work.
much about that, can you?
No.
And sweetheart, this is your difficulty is you've got to stay clear. You've got to learn to try and be content, love your husband for who he is, accept this poisonous brother, unless you decide. I mean, in the end, you have got two choices, Jivrab. It's always as brutal, but you've got two choices. You leave or you stay. And if you stay, you've got to work on your mind, because this is your reality. This is your life. You can't change your husband, and you can't stop this brother. You can't change them, darling. All you can do is change yourself. And if you can't handle it, then like the earlier person, you have to leave. I know it sounds brutal, but when it comes down to it, we have two choices, Jivrav. We stay and we change our mind, or we leave. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am.
Not easy, is it?
Okay. No.
It's not, darling. So I can't help your husband and I can't help his brother, but I can help you. So you have to be clear that this is your life, and you'll try to be content with it, and you try to keep yourself out of the way of the troublemaker, and you do your best to be happy, darling, if you're going to be staying there. You understand my point?
Okay. Yes, I do. Thank you. So
Not easy,
the other small thing I wanted to ask was, is there a way that this karma or this karmic connection will ever come to an end without
Of course it will, but
thinking of leaving?
Of course it will, but someone's got to do something to make it end.
Okay.
Of course it will. I mean, of course it will at some point. Yes.
I mean, between the brothers. Also,
that's right. I know that. I know
brothers.
what you're talking about. It's possible, yes, but all the evidence is it's the opposite right now. It's that the evidence now is it's being fed all the time, isn't it? But you have to give up any expectation it will end, though, darling. You can't think like that. It's no good for you to think that way, to constantly be waiting for it to change. That'll make you miserable. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Nothing much you can do, sweetheart.
Yeah, true. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Hugo. What else then, people? I mean, this is life, isn't it? We're all the same, one way or another. It's how we all are. And this is where our compassion, I mean, Jivra, I'm not trying to talk about you behind your back, but I'm using it as a good example. First, Jivra was talking about the problem between the brothers, but in the end, all we can do is talk to Jivra. Give her advice, all we can do is work on ourselves, because your husband's going to come with his baggage and his husband and his things and their children and their grandmother and their neighbors and their this and his habits. I mean, this is life. And this is where our compassion is the point you said, you might see the suffering. She sees it nakedly. She sees what's going on, like ridiculous. But what she can do, her hands are tied. There's nothing you can do. So then will it end? She's hoping. She's hoping it will end. But if you just live there in hoping something will end, you will go mad. Jivra, this is the point. It is what it is right now. And this is the difficulty.
Yes, that is
This
true.
is the part, sweetheart. This is your life, and you've got to try and make the most of it and not get destroyed by it, sweetheart. Do you understand me?
Yes.
Yeah, not easy. I mean, the Buddhists have a saying, if you can change something, please change it. But what if you can't? This is why, Jivrab, I talk about this example I said to you, it's basically two choices, you know, you leave or you stay. You've got those choices, darling, as much as you might not think you have. So if you feel you can't bear it any longer, then that's one choice. But if you know, you decide, this is my life, this is my husband, the brother is there, and all the garbage, I'm going to do my best and work on it, work on my mind. Now, my friends in prison don't have that luxury. That's why I always use the examples. You know, my friend Sunny, who's in Ireland now, is in prison in Florida for 17 years on death row. She was accused of murdering 2 policemen along with her husband. He even got executed. She went to the execution in the prison and his head burst into flames. I mean, you can't imagine the nightmare, you know. But she didn't have the luxury to change. In a cell, years on end, totally innocent, accused of murdering 2 policemen. Husband got executed. Her children were given away. Her parents died in a car accident. One nightmare after another. And she said, finally, in this cell, I decided I couldn't change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. She said, I knew I had a choice. And this is what we have to say. This is the point you wrote. We have to know we've got a choice. Our choices, we've mostly got 2 choices: stay or go. As brutal as it sounds, she didn't even have that choice. She only had one choice: to change her mind. To change, this is what I'm talking to Jevro, to change your interpretation of this situation. There was no benefit to her to go crazy. And this is common. I've got so many friends in prison. There are so many people, especially in this country, who are wrongly accused, you know. I remember reading at the same time about this woman. I read about her. Now I know her when she's out of prison, Sunny. I remember this.
Robina, can you tell me, if I'm meditating and during the end of the day, what is it exactly that I can say while meditating so that this kind of hurts me a little less?
Okay, darling, why don't you get my email address and you write to me and we can discuss it? How about that?
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Write down my name. My email address is my name, Robina Courtin. You got the spelling, yeah?
Yes.
At Mac, like the computer, at mac.com. You write to me. All right, darling.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At the same time as I read about this woman, I read about this fellow who was also wrongly accused. And he would be what we call typical, normal. He went out of his brain with rage and despair, screaming daily, I did not rape and kill that woman. Talk about reputation. Talk about, can you imagine, even when someone slightly thinks you're a bit mean, but here you are being accused of murdering 2 policemen, right? And this fellow, because of the accusation, this is what makes most people go completely out of their brain. He lost his mind. So that's what we would call normal, because we really believe we can't, our happiness and suffering is coming from the outside. He would totally believe he was gone crazy because of his accusations. This is not being gentle. This is intense. But this woman, Sunny, she's not a Buddhist. She's a nice little Jewish hippie, you know. She said, I knew I had a choice, meaning to change her mind, meaning to reinterpret this utter nightmare so that she didn't go crazy. That's the practice we're talking about here. She didn't have the luxury of choice. But she even said, I knew that, she said, they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I am not in a cell, I'm in a cave. Now, she wasn't living in a fantasy world. She knew she wasn't in a bloody cave. But she this is the real point the Buddha's making. She reinterpreted that nightmare. And who was the beneficiary? Her. That's the point. That's the point. So we can change our mind. It means we can change the way we interpret our lives. That's the point. It's outrageous, but we can hear the logical. It's the hardest job we'll ever do, but that is the source of sanity. We know this from ordinary stories all the time, you know. I mean, you hear about people, you hear about people like in Auschwitz, who were happy people who didn't go out completely crazy because they had a different way of seeing things. So really, it's sort of evidence that the way we see things is what causes happiness and suffering. But we don't join the dots, you know, because we're so addicted
to the external environment, addicted to believing that that's why I'm suffering or that's why I'm happy. So it's pretty intense, but we can do it. One little, don't wait till you put on death row to start, okay? Start now with forgiving your sister and whatever, you know, little baby things. It's so intense. Who else is there? Anybody else there, darling? No. What time is it? 10 to 9. Any questions, you people, before we finish? It's time to go home.
I've got a question.
Good.
Okay, I was going over my notes this morning from last night, and I came across the equanimity issue.
Yeah.
And so my interpretation of equanimity has always been the quality of, you know, remaining composed.
Yes, that's right.
Trying situations.
That's right.
When there's conflicting.
Exactly.
Either.
That's right.
Situations or information.
That's right.
What you presented last night was equanimity as it had to do with that all people want to be happy.
That's right. So, but there's no contradiction, because there is that equanimity. The first one is the wisdom wing. That's the wisdom wing one. As you progress on your path and stop killing and stealing and lying and living your vows and do your practice every day and lessen attachment and lessen anger, you will get equanimity within you. That's a valid one. But this is a different interpretation of the word on the Mahayana path. The one you just said is perfect. We need that one. That comes as a result of practice. So there's different uses of the word equanimity in Buddhism. That's exactly correct. That's in the wisdom wing, in the first stages of practice in yourself.
Yes.
That's exactly right. But this one is a completely different interpretation of the word. It's in the Mahayana path.
Okay.
Do you understand? That's the difference.
So, but I'm uncertain or not clear where that came from.
Where what came from?
Where you're
the Mahayana path. It's the bodhicitta. It's the bodhisattva path. It's the bodhisattva path. All the techniques, there are two main techniques in the Mahayana path for accomplishing bodhicitta. One is called the 6 causes and 1 effect, or the 7-point mind training. The other one is called exchanging self for others. And they both start with the first practice called equanimity, which is recognizing. I hear your point, but listen, these words are used very precisely. So equanimity is the start, is the first step to get yourself out of the equation and recognize that the friend, the enemy, and the stranger, instead of seeing them through the lens of your attachment and your aversion and your ignorance, right? You get yourself out of the equation and you remove yourself completely from it and see that these 3 people, they're equal from one point of view, if not many others. They are equal in only wanting happiness and only not wanting suffering. That's the first step. And now on the basis of that, you begin to build love and compassion for all of them. Right now, you have love and compassion for your beloveds because they suit you. That's like everybody. But here, because you've changed your logic, you now want every one of them to be happy, which is love. And you want every one of them to be free of suffering, which is compassion. Equanimity is the foundation upon which you build valid love and compassion for everybody.
Thank you for that.
Clear now?
Yes.
Good job. These words are very precisely used, not just some vague, Yeah. It's a starting point. It's the first step, foundation, basis in the Mahayana path. That's the thing. Yeah. Time to go home, I think, something. Okay, people. So tomorrow we're going to do, I don't know who's coming tomorrow, but whatever, we're doing the module 1, isn't it?
Tomorrow we're doing discovering Buddhism.
That's right. Did you get the course notes I sent you, Sheila? Did you see what I did? It's all the FPMT notes put together in a proper little booklet. So you can use it. I can prepare all of those for you for the future for all of your modules if you want. Do you understand me?
Yes. You should probably talk to Gus.
What?
You should probably talk.
Oh, he does the Discovering Buddhism.
He does Discovering
Oh, okay. I'll send them to him then.
But the stuff that you sent is
good. Well, because he does all the DB normally.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll send him all that. So I'll tell him what.
He'll be here tomorrow.
Oh, he's coming. Oh, good. Brilliant. We'll talk it. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, people. So some of tomorrow, some of you not. something next week, some of you not, whatever. So we think we've been here a couple of hours. Every thought we've had, and we've sown seeds. So be delighted, we've sown these seeds in our mind, run a bit of programming. So we delight in these seeds we planted. And we think we're going to nourish these seeds with our efforts, with our practice from the second forward, taking ourselves as a work in progress, molding our minds into the shape of a happy, wise, marvelous, compassionate person. And be happy with this. Be happy with this. It's just part of practice, And we just, delight. Jangchob semchob rinpoche ma ke panam ke guchi ke panyampa me payang gongne gongdu pabashog gewa di nudo dag lama sange drubgyone drawa chikyang malupa de sala gurpa shog. That'll do. Thank you, people.